Welcome to Nicole Stone Outdoors, and today I'm going to do a quick video on how you can find and identify panfish in early summer. Alright, so this is early summer. The water temps here are just reaching 70 degrees. Fish are congregating in the weeds, and it is the perfect time of year to troll for all species. Now, this is going to be kind of panfish dominated because a lot of people reach out and ask how to find and identify panfish in the weeds this time of year, but today we've caught every species you can imagine: pike, walleye, bass, crappie, sunfish, you name it. We catch them all in the weeds, and that's why it is such a great option for you if you want to just go out with your friends and family and find fish. Now, what we did is we went and found some structure off of where we found them this spring. Now, we saw them on beds this spring. We were able to capitalize on that, and then we kind of looked for structure off of where those bed lines were. And what we did is just plowed through the weeds. We did identify these fish on our graphs, which I'm going to go over in depth for you. But one of the best things we did then is just put a spinner and split shot, or you can just use a floating snell, and just go over these weeds and cover them. And if you hook up on enough fish this way, you definitely can sit down on this particular spot and use a bobber or a jig and pick them off. But also, if you just want to cover ground and see what you catch, then just keep trolling back and forth along those weeds. And so what we're using are Apex Pro rods from Tune Up Custom Rods. These are kind of our rigging rods. What they are is they're medium fast action. They've got a little bit stiffer backbone to them, but they do have that fast action end. They're just a really good rigging rod to keep on board, and so we've got a few of them that we always keep ready, whether we're rigging for panfish, walleye, whatever. And then we have got 8-pound fluoro to that. Shots, very small split shots, and a spinner on. And those split shots are just allowing us to essentially go on top of the weeds a little bit more. Like, we're still plowing through weeds because some of these weeds, as you guys will see, are really, really tall. But it does allow us to kind of not have such a mess and pick up some of those more suspended fish like crappie. We have been going between 0.8 and 1.2, which is pretty standard for running a spinner, and just going across that top of the weeds. And we've hooked up into multiple crappies, bluegills, walleye, bass, pike, as you guys will see, and it's been very, very successful. So now I'm going to show you guys a little bit more about what we're using, and I'm going to show you kind of a breakdown on what we see and the structure that we follow when we do this time of year. Okay, so this is the exact chart that I use when I find panfish this time of year. Now, this does have a graph up in the left-hand corner. The upper right is 2D sonar, bottom right is down imaging. Those are the three I'm going to primarily use in the weeds. We're not going to do much with side imaging right now. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to go over is in that left-hand corner where I have the arrow. I'm trying to adjust the arrow. That is my 10 feet or less depth indicator. You can do depth highlight on any depth on Humminbird, something for a different video. But I've just got it set to 10 or less. And back within there is really where they were bedding in the super shallows about a month ago. Not even, maybe 3 weeks ago. Okay, so this area I'm circling in the upper left right now, that is actually what I mentioned, is where we found them bedding. The shallower, the more panfish we found bedding at the time. But that just gave me an idea of where to start, which is really, really important when you are panfishing and you just need to know what shoreline you want to start on. So I highly recommend that you identify the shallows. If you knew where they bed, then you're already off to a good start. Otherwise, we're going to really look towards some sort of structure along the shoreline. So that's what I was doing here. Structure along the shoreline. Usually you can find some crappies there, some bluegills there, maybe some walleyes. Can't go wrong with looking for some structure. You're going to find them off of the structure at times. But to give you guys a place to start, look for some structure along these shallow shorelines like I did right here. All right, so the green mark is all weeds. Like, that is thick weeds. We're right on the edge of the thick weeds at this point. There's weeds all the way out to that point. So we're still pulling up weeds if we let our lure down. It's just they're not as dense, and so we're able to actually get some fish out of this image. This is not always going to be the case, as I'll show you shortly. But as you can see here, this really is on 2D where you're going to see a ton of fish, and it's just out of control. There's just tons of them. They're moving. That's why you're getting all that. Down imaging is going to be what you use to identify these fish individually and help you see structure. So that's what I have going on right here. As you can see under the down imaging image on the lower right, you can see each individual fish, where the 2D sonar image is just kind of more of a mess. Both of them are showing you fish. Again, using them together can really be beneficial, but all you need to find fish is 2D sonar. So now I'm circling where I found, the individual pods of fish. The fish on the left are probably smaller bluegill. The fish on the right are a little larger, maybe some crappies. I know there's some walleye in that mix because I literally caught them. So we pulled up crappie bluegill, pike bass, you know, you can kind of tell if you're sitting still, especially the size of the fish to some degree based on looking at your both 2D sonar and down imaging results. Okay, so one other chart that goes with it, this is actually my Garmin LiveScope. You do not need Garmin LiveScope. You really just need 2D sonar. But the Garmin LiveScope is going to give you at least an idea of what I look at when I'm looking at the Garmin. This is just fun. This is forward facing. You can see each individual fish I'm circling. There's 2 sitting there. You got some high flyers. This is really awesome. This is forward facing, however. So we're facing it at the pot of fish. It's going to be kind of more of a confined cone versus downward that we were on our 2D and down imaging. So those are both downward cones. This is going to be forward facing. So if you want to cast out to them, that's where the Garmin comes in. You do not need the Garmin to do any of this. I just enjoy it because it's a live image. I can see these fish moving. All right, so now I want to show you guys what it looks like in heavy, heavy weeds. Now we just transitioned a little bit farther into heavy weeds. I'm circling right now areas of the thickest weeds. Caught a lot of crappie off of here. Now these are weed stacks. This can be a little bit difficult to tell on 2D, especially if they're thinner weed stacks, which I don't have an example of because they can sometimes look like fish stacked on each other. But as you can see with down imaging here, they are definitely weeds. And that is the joy of using these 2 charts together, is they can really help show you what you're seeing. And down imaging is key for looking at structure. You can use it for fish, but at times it's just best for structure. That's why a lot of people have it, actually. And so here you can see that these stacks are not just stacks of fish like we saw in the last one, but actually weeds. It is harder to identify the individual fish here. You can see the few individual fish on top on the 2D sonar up on the upper right. On the down imaging, you can see a little bit of, you know, what could look like some fish that I'm circling right there on top of the weeds. But really using these 2 together, you know that there's fish sitting on top, and then that's why we're going to take our spinner over the top of them. So again, just labeling 2D upper right, down imaging bottom right together, they are really killer for panfish in the weeds. Now just to touch base on side imaging in the bottom left, this will show you weeds too, I can see them. But to understand side imaging, which is a video in and of itself, you have to understand the water column is that blue arrow that I just created. And that is the deucer down to the surface of the lake. Now that area is just the water column right below your boat, and so you can identify the weeds over there. Now left is the left side if you're driving, right is the right side. And it's just understanding that that dark area right next to the boat moving is the water column, and there you can identify the weeds. So I am circling those exact same weeds that you should be able to see right there. And that is the same weeds we're looking at on the right. Okay, so finally, just looking back over at 2D sonar, I am just taking my spinner and going over the top of them. So that's what that blue line I just drew is if you're focusing on the right. Fish oftentimes feed up, they look up, they see the bait, and you're really pulling them out of the weed line with very minimal weeds. Now, you're definitely gonna run into times when there are weeds with your spinners and you're gonna be pulling them off a lot, but for the most part, if you've got a light split shot on there and you're cruising, you're going to be able to pick some of these fish out of this weeds as they feed up. And that's kind of what we were doing because we found a lot of the crappie in the thickest of those weeds. Okay, finally, I just want to show you guys one example of bait. I just circled a bait ball. That's what that is. This whole thing is a bait ball on the upper right on sonar. Well, you can see fish on the bottom there, so I'm circling actual fish off the bottom that I'm seeing. But for the most part, all of that noise on top is bait. And that is really important because when you have bait balls come through, that oftentimes mean there are fish around. But I just wanted to show this. This is not at all correlated to the pan fishing I was doing before. The water temp is 46 degrees but in this clip. But it was just an example to show you the difference between what fish look like and a bait ball looks like. Yes, bait is fish, but you're not going to be targeting all these little dots that are probably just a school of shiners. Hopefully that helps you guys out. I plan on doing more in-depth locations and strategies using 2D and down imaging and side imaging sonar in the next few YouTube videos I do. So let me know if this is helpful for you and leave any comments below.